Well, my next guest is a brave man, and I'll tell you why in a second. But he just posted this the other day. He said, I write this with a heavy heart. In the last 2 weeks, my brother and my best friend, the closest and dearest men to me, disowned me. My brother told me, if you go to Israel, you're no longer my brother. My best friend told me, I'm basically supporting ISIS because I said Israel has a right to defend itself. So, this is someone who's expressing unpopular opinions, isn't even afraid to do that with his best friend and his brother. So anyone like that is bound to attract a lot of positive and a lot of negative attention. And I'm one of the people who happen to have found him on the internet. It's not like he's trying to hide, but he's on X. He's very vocal about his opinions. And it is a great pleasure to have Luai Ahmed on with us this morning. It's such a pleasure. And congratulations on all the infamy that you seem to be getting on the internet lately.
Thank you, thank you. I actually started writing in English because I used to write in Swedish for the past 4 years. But once I changed to English, I got a lot of attention because the things that I'm talking about concern a lot of people. I've been writing about Islamism and integration and migration and these kind of like major conflicts in Swedish. And I've gained a bit of a following in Sweden, but Sweden is a tiny country. So once I changed to English, a lot of people from all around the world have been more interested in what I have to say. So I'm really happy that a lot of people are voicing a lot of support to the things that I'm saying. And they're also happy to see that there's someone who has grown up within this culture, who's critical of it, and who does not want to see Europe succumb into the dogma of Islamic radicalization. So thank you for
Well, we'll
having
get
me.
Thank you. We'll get into Sweden in a minute because that's a fascinating cultural melting pot as well. And I know you've had your own experiences there, which have very much influenced the things that you've been saying on social media. But let's just start with your story at the beginning. You're originally Yemeni.
Yes. I grew up. I was born in Sana'a, Yemen, and Sana'a is one of the most conservative Islamic countries in the world. The vast majority of all the women actually wear the niqab and the hijab. So I grew up never seeing a single woman in my life show her hair,
Hmm.
except for my mother. My mother is a feminist human rights activist. So that's kind of been the beginning of my inspiration. My mom was also married off when she was 8 years old, and she had to fight for her rights ever since she was a child. She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to wear the niqab when she was 11. So she's constantly had a struggle to fight against this dogma of Islamic conservatism. So she sought education. She got a divorce when she was a child, and she ended up learning and being knowledgeable and dismantling this kind of insanely conservative, ultra orthodox Islamic ideology. And she passed that on onto her children to be critical, to seek education. And so I grew up in Yemen for 20 years, and I soaked in the waters of Islamism and conservatism and hatred towards homosexuals, LGBT, Jews, different people. And by different people, I mean anybody who is not Muslim, who does not believe in
Hmm.
Islam. We have a word for everybody who is not a Muslim, which is kafir or kuffar. So I grew up in all of that for 20 years. And then 2014, I left and I went to Sweden. It's a long story on how I was able to leave to leave Yemen and go to Sweden, but thankfully I did. And once I arrived in Sweden, I I had a shock because I in the refugee camp that I was in, I realized that everybody who was coming to Sweden was, unlike myself, Islamist, wanted to change Sweden, was not able or willing to adapt to the culture that they were coming to. They looked down upon Sweden. They thought that the Swedish culture and the Swedish way of living was false. And that was a bit of an awakening to me, because I thought like, oh my God, I thought that everybody who came to Sweden wanted to be Swedish, wanted to live in the secular, open-minded culture that allows women to take off their scarves and hijabs without harassment, like my mother.
Hmm.
My mom is the
Right.
kind of person who should have been moving to Sweden, but alas, everybody that I met in the refugee was completely against this. And I learned Swedish. I started working at restaurants. I worked in hotels. I worked for a bit for 2 3 years, and during that time, I perfected my Swedish. And I went to university and studied international migration and ethnic relations for a bit. But my
Hmm.
main focus was to perfect Swedish because I wanted to write in Swedish. I wanted to engage in Swedish politics, and I ended up doing that.
That's phenomenal. You've left your father out of this story because he also plays quite an important part. Certainly from the opening paragraph, which I read from your brother, that your father was very much an Arab nationalist and someone who believed that Palestine needed to win in a war against Israel, and that Palestine's position was actually a position that all Muslims should aspire to fight for, to hold. And that was completely different, it seems, to the opinion that you have now.
Yes, I did grow up also believing in the Palestinian cause. Like I wrote in yesterday's post, is that in the Middle East and the Arab world, there are two religions. There's Islam, and that is a very dominant religion that by law kills you if you do not adhere to it, or if you criticize it, or if you leave it. And the second religion is Palestine, or as we call it, Al-Qadiyya al-Falastiniya. Al-Qadiyya al-Falastiniya, which means the Palestinian cause. That word, that sentence has a very strong ring to it, because
Mm.
it is not, Islam is kind of like your giving culture and religion, but the Palestinian cause is a fight. It is kind of
Right.
like, many people are familiar with the word jihad, which means like the either internal or external fight to spread Islam and defend Islam. The Palestinian cause is seen from another lens. It's seen from the lens of the Jews who we hate, have mobilized themselves, and they have attacked us, and they have stolen our land, and they have a plan to take over all of our lands, corrupt our religion, corrupt our societies, destroy us. And that is more of a proactive religion, where you have to fight back. You have to go. That's why Yemen is bombing. That's why Yemen is bombing Israel right now, because Yemen is one of those countries who has been one of the most pro Palestine. Whenever you enter the stores, whenever you enter supermarkets, or any just normal stores in Yemen, there are Palestinian posters everywhere. So yeah, I grew up with that. I grew up with my family's mentality. And then when went to Sweden, I did not even believe in the Holocaust. I thought it was just like my society says. It is, a Jewish plot, to
Propaganda, yeah.
propaganda to gain sympathy. But no, they were not burned. And if they were burned, then that would have been a good thing. So in Sweden, I started my journey into kind of cleaning myself from that, and more like educating myself, really. And I did. I ended up educating. Well, before I came to Sweden, I had already left the Islamic conservative mindset. I had already, read books uh, by, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. I read books into evolution, critical of the Yemeni, not Yemeni, the Islamic culture, and that kind of like cleaned my brain from the attachment that I had to the culture. But I still went to Sweden with anti-Semitism. I still went to Sweden with kind of like a weird eye. So living in Sweden, I was able to clean that off. And 3 years, 4 years after being in Sweden, and after learning Sweden, I started writing about my experiences and about where I lived, what I grew up, and all of that.
I just want to stop on this idea that there are two religions, because I think it's quite a breakthrough concept. The first being Islam itself, which, as you say, is in no doubt about what it means to be a Muslim, and what it means to leave Islam, and what it means to convert to Islam. And there are very strict rules here, and it's not some soft thing like the Western world has this idea, because Christianity is, you know, is light and weak and
And
not particularly
reformed.
and well reformed, but it's not particularly heavy handed. And as religions go, Christianity seems to be kind of interpreted by every individual Christian in whatever way they prefer it to be, with no real dogma overarching or hierarchically extending itself down the chain.
Well,
So
there was
Islam.
dogma before. Sorry for interrupting. There
No,
was
there
dogma.
no, there was. You're right, and obviously there was the Reformation, and there were all the things that have happened since the Protestant religion, or the Protestant forms of Christianity have branched out, and as it's gone all over the world. And we should be grateful for those reforms because, Catholicism 600 years ago was not a pleasant thing. It was Galileo didn't think so, and so many others, the victims of the conquistadors, the Crusades, they would have said to you that this is a very violent and angry religion. Maybe Islam is there now. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think Islam is very clear about what it is and what it stands for, and it's not really negotiable. People in the West seem to think that it's just like the soft version of Christianity. And then this Palestinian cause, which seems, according to what you've explained now, to be a proxy war. It's kind of a thing that all Arab Muslims, certainly, but even Muslims beyond the Arab world, can get involved in and feel like they're participating in an existential struggle against an existential enemy. And that if you are participating in this struggle, that it somehow, gives fuel to your identity as an Arab nationalist or as an Arab Muslim in particular. Do you think that's fair to say?
Absolutely. It's also important to note that, and I've written a lot about this in Swedish, that normal non-conservative Muslims who move to Europe, like say someone who just um, normally drinks alcohol in Saudi Arabia or Yemen secretly,
Mm,
once they come to Europe, once they come to Sweden or Britain or the US, they turn conservative. They become more, they attach themselves more to the religion. And the reason for that is, you read, like in Yemen, you read a lot about alcohol, you read about the kuffar, you read about how women who do not cover themselves are dirty. You read about all of these fantasy things that you're against, but you never see them. Women in Yemen and Saudi Arabia and
mm,
in the vast majority of the Muslim world, you do not see your enemy in the books. You only hear about them. Once you move to Europe, once you move to the US and the West, you live within that society that you have learned to hate and learned to loathe, and you become active in your religion. You make sure that your family, that your daughter and your sisters do not um, become that way, because they might end up in hell. The alcohol is everywhere, so there is the jihad, which is the struggle or the internal struggle. And with the Jews, with the Jews and Israel, it's the same thing. Before the creation of the Israeli state, there was persecution and hatred towards Jews in every single Arab and Muslim country, but there was not this idea of, we have to actively exterminate the Jews. Because yes, while they do attack us in our own societies, they're not well mobilized. They do not have their own armies. They do not have strength. They only work from the bottom down. But once the creation,
it's so weird. I just want to stop you here for a second because, again, going back to your journey to Sweden and the journey of so many. I mean, the huge wave of Muslim immigration to Europe is already becoming Europe's big political question. It's happened individually within countries and within the EU, and some people are comfortable talking about it, and some people obviously are not. But why is there this resistance to assimilation? You would think that people who'd moved from a place like Yemen, which is a hard country to live in, um, you think about people who would flee wars in Iraq or in Syria. You think
Mhm.
about people like the Kurds in northern Iraq, or like the people who are in Saudi Arabia, perhaps being persecuted to this day by strict Wahhabism or something. You would think those people would be embracing of the idea that they're in a society now which is free and where they can participate in that and enjoy the freedom that they were denied in the country that they've just fled from. And yet the need to belong is so great that they revert to those things they were taught when they were young, and they become more religious according to your interpretation.
Hmm. Hmm. I think it comes down to, I do believe that if the United Nations Alien Convention's definition of refugee was applied, and the people who did come to Europe or allowed into to Europe on refugee basis actually fulfilled the quota, which is a well-founded fear of persecution, then people would have assimilated. Because if you do have a well-founded fear of persecution in the Middle East, say you're an atheist who
Mm,
cannot, fulfill your freedom of expression. You cannot exercise criticism of the state. If you're a journalist who really has a critical thought, critical mindset towards the culture, if you are a homosexual who would get killed by the state, if you were someone who left Islam, if you were a Christian, if you were a Jew, if you have a well-founded fear of persecution and left the Middle East and came to Europe, the probability of you actually wanting to assimilate is very high. And this is something that I also see from my own experience, is that most of my friends in Sweden who are well assimilated, well established, learn the language, love Sweden, are atheists, ex-Muslims, homosexuals, lesbians, women who have been almost killed by their family for leaving their hijab. Those are like my friends in Sweden, people who actually do have a well-founded fear of
I
persecution.
mean, the irony also is that the only country in the Middle East where you would have any rights in those groups you've just mentioned is Israel,
Yep.
right? And Israel's the only country where you'd have free expression, where you would be allowed to be an apostate, as the term goes for those who leave Islam. So you, I'm assuming, have adopted your new life in inverted commas and taken on a Swedish identity, but you've lost a lot along the way, and you've had to be prepared to sacrifice a lot. And when I started this interview, I read that opening line from your blog, and I think this is really valuable information for people who are perhaps in a similar situation and circumstance. Maybe they're listening to this in some part of the world where you're not able to be free to express yourself, and you need to know what the cost of that is. Do you want to go into what you've lost, and then we can look at what you gained?
Well, I do think that um, I've lost when I started writing in Swedish about migration and integration around 4 years ago. Two of my friends started translating my writings and translating my tweets back then, and they know and they don't want to be friends with me anymore. And that's the beginning of me, like the loss the loss of as a price of freedom of speech. But actually, I do come from a very secular and open-minded family, so I never lost family or friends because of my mindset and my thinking. Actually, my mother is a very outspoken feminist and human rights activist. So people
Mm.
kind of thought, well, of course he's his mother's son. Of course he rocks the boat. But I take it a bit too far, according to them. So that's why, like, I never lost any of my family members or closest friends because of my criticism towards Islam,
Mm.
criticism towards the culture. Most Muslims actually do agree that the Islamic culture is a failure. Is that we technologically, scientifically, medicinally, we are failures, and they are very well aware of that. So when they see me saying that we need to change our mindset, we need to stop killing people for thinking differently, you'd have, at least 30%, 40% of Muslims who say, yes, you're right. I would say the majority disagree, but I come from that enlightened part who wants to have a reformation in the Islamic world. But the Palestine and Israel thing came as a shock to me, and that's why I wrote in my last tweet that I came to the realization that Palestine is a religion, because in the Islamic world, you have families disowning you for criticizing Islam or for leaving the religion. And I never really had family members, doing that to me because I come from an enlightened family.
Mm.
But it turns out that Israel and Palestine is another religion, a deeper religion, I would say, because that's where my brother drew a line. And he said, if you go there, if you continue to support the Israelis and the Israeli state, then you're no longer my brother. He never said that when I criticized Islam and I criticized the Islamic culture. So I do think that has made me fall into a realization of how anti-Semitism. Well, I've always known that anti-Semitism is deep, runs deep in our blood in the Arabian culture. I mean, you grew up in mosques that repeatedly keep saying that we have to destroy Israel, we have to kill the Jews. So I didn't know that ran so deep in my family's blood. Like, I keep telling my family members, but we've learned through my mother to be critical towards the culture
Mm.
that we live in. But why is this certain thing off, off limits?
Yeah.
And they say that Israel is committing a genocide, and that's all that's all the information that they have to give me for why they're cutting ties with me. And yeah, it's sad. And I the funny, well, it's not so funny, but it's kind of funny as well. But I do tell my brother and my family and my friends is that I am not even voicing any support towards the war right now. I am not saying that Israel has to continue bombing Gaza. I say that things like Israel has to exterminate Hamas. I don't know how.
Mm.
I truly do not believe that the current bombing toward that's happening is going to eradicate Hamas completely. I think actually quite the opposite. I think Hamas is going to gain so much more support in Palestine, like in the West Bank. So I don't know what the perfect way. I could be wrong as well. It could be a
Mm.
way to subjugate Hamas and make Palestinians realize that they need to um, de-radicalize. But I,
Well,
I, I don't know.
you're going to have a tough time exterminating an idea, and that's really part of the problem, is that Hamas is an idea. But when you talk about how Israel must exterminate Hamas, I mean, it's not even we're not even talking about the Middle East here. I live in a country on the southern tip of Africa where our government just hosted a Hamas delegation who came to visit South Africa. Now, most governments in the world wouldn't touch Hamas with a 10-inch pole, I mean, a 20-foot pole with a health inspector on the other end, because they're such odious people. But our government seems to be very happy to cozy up to them. And it's that kind of thing that really confounds me, because first of all, I don't believe that there's anyone in our government who even understands what's happening in the Middle East. I think they're choosing to associate with what they believe is some kind of brotherly revolutionary movement, some sort of liberation struggle, which is far away but has echoes of what they went through here in South Africa during a much more obviously moral struggle against racism, effectively. But it strikes me as odd that it has spread beyond the Arab world. It's spread beyond, just places like Yemen, where it's more understandable to me. Do you find that odd as well?
It is odd, but I have bad news. South Africa is not the only country that has kind of like been very cuddly with Hamas. I would say
Mm.
Sweden has been.
Yeah.
Uh, this is something that has not come out in international media. I think I'm going to write something about it sooner or later. But our Social Democratic Party, which is the leading political party in Sweden, they have run Sweden for the past 90 years. I think I could be wrong. They've only had, I think, around 8 years where they lost the elections in the past 90 years or so. They have a parliamentarian. His name is Jamal Al Haj, and Jamal Al Haj is Palestinian. He has been seen in different Hamas conferences. He attended a Hamas conference, even though the political party told him not to attend the conference. He still attended it, and he was seen doing, making a speech while there are Hamas flags behind him.
Mm.
He has been seen, and there have been pictures taken of him hugging a Hamas leader. And all of this has been documented, and the Social Democratic Party has still not let go of him. This is one of those topics that is ongoing in Sweden. Why is the Social
Wow.
Democratic Party, the leading party in Sweden, not letting go of this guy who clearly has ties with Hamas, clearly sympathizes with them? When he
Why
was asked,
can I ask you something? This is something that confounds and completely confuses me. Um, we talked about the lack of assimilation by certain conservative Muslims in Europe, but there's a corollary to that. There's another story, which is the equal and opposite story, and that is that white Western Europeans, particularly in left-leaning and liberal countries like Sweden, have this idea that the most important virtue they can have is tolerance and acceptance and this welcoming attitude. And it's probably because they're not entirely sure what their culture is. And we can talk about which cultures are dominant, which are less so, but it turns out that places like Sweden don't actually know what they stand for. And this is probably part of the problem for them in why they've allowed themselves to be, I suppose, abused culturally, to be subsumed into. I mean, there's certain parts of Sweden, you know this better than me. There's certain towns and cities where there isn't Swedish spoken.
Mm.
Arabic is spoken. There are certain places where Swedish women are told not to go. And this is all very much hush hush. We don't talk about this in public because the Swedish would hate to be seen as being intolerant. But the reality is that parts of their country have completely been overrun by a culture that isn't from there, that isn't native to Sweden, that isn't the culture that Swedish people recognize in any way. And they've let it happen, which is on them. It's not on the Muslim populations who've come in and have changed this because there has been resistance and they managed to stand up to it. It's just steamrolled right over the Swedes.
Mm. Yeah, you're sadly right there. Um, if you take the subway in Stockholm from Södermalm, which is like the white hipster, well, Östermalm, the white hipster parts of Stockholm, a
Yes.
15-minute ride to Rinkeby, and you're in Mogadishu or Somalia. And these two worlds rarely, if they ever meet. And you're right. I think in Sweden's case, they exotify the idea of multiculturalism. They do not want to face the fact that it is problematic. Um, I was on the Swedish television like 2 years ago debating multiculturalism, and
Mm.
there was this woman in front of me. We were debating, and I told her multiculturalism does not work because we're from the culture that I come from. We kill LGBTQ people, we kill atheists, we kill free thinkers. So once that arrives here, you can't. It does not work. Many of these people are going to want to continue on this road. And you know what her reply is? Her reply was, well, actually, Luai, we have societies in Europe like Poland and Hungary that are anti-women, that are anti-LGBTQ people. I swear I was so in shock at her response, and the moderator just went on. I felt so gaslit. Like, are you
Mhm.
freaking kidding me? Do you have
Yeah.
no idea what I just told you? Like, we kill these people. We kill women. We kill people who are
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
different.
Muslims are not hiding the ball in these conservative Muslim countries. This equivocation, and to go back to Israel for a second, because this is where I think you've been absolutely honest and astonishingly brave. To say, because there's this idea that there's both sides. If you're a good journalist or a good person, you'll look at it from both sides. And I hear people who argue with me on social media. I don't know if I could call all of them friends, but certainly some of them are people who I've known for a long time. Say to me, "Oh no, but what Israel's doing now when they bomb Gaza by trying to get rid of Hamas, that is genocidal." So actually, what happened on October the 7th is the same. How do you even react to a person who really genuinely believes that?
I mean, you could tell them the truth, but there's a high chance that they're just going to look past the truth. And the truth is that Israel targets and wants to kill terrorists, the terrorists that want to kill them. That's their main target. I have met IDF soldiers who are Muslim, who are Bedouins, who are Iraqis, who come from the same blood and the same culture of these same people that they're accusing of wanting to kill.
Mhm.
And Hamas wants to kill every single Jew. So what? Not just Jews, Israelis as well. So the definition of genocide is also a part of the definition of genocide is having the intention of ethnically cleansing an ethnic group. Um, Israel does not have that intention. They want if wanting to eradicate a terrorist group is genocide, then yes, Israel has that intention. But that's not the definition of genocide. Genocide is wanting to eradicate and kill a large number of people. That is what Hamas wants to do. So I say that what happened on October the 7th was a genocide. What is happening right now is not a genocide. It is the attempt to eradicate a terrorist group that hides under tunnels, that has no respect or value of human life, uses their own humans as shields, kills their own people, want to die. I was talking to a police officer in Israel, and she was telling me, when we were standing on the same street where the Hamas truck came in with all their soldiers,
Hmm.
they all ran, like all the police officers started running into the police station. That police station, by the way, right now does not exist. It has
Hmm.
been destroyed to the ground because of the fight that happened there between the Hamas soldiers and them. And the police officers were telling us that this is not a normal enemy. You cannot, the way you're not equipped, you cannot fight with someone who wants to die, because to them, they don't care about losing their lives. They want to be killed. So
Mm.
they're going to start running right at you without any fear, because if you shoot them, if you kill them, they go to heaven. That's how Hamas fights. While the Israeli police officers, which one of them was Lebanese, by the way, when they fight, when they try to fight against Hamas, they want to protect their lives as well. That is not how Hamas fights. This very distinction is something that many people who engage in this debate do not understand, or do not want to actually fathom,
Well, I
because
mean, isn't it Ismail Haniyeh, who's the nominal leader of Hamas, who said, "You love life, we love death." You know, you can't come to terms with someone like that because they're actually not in it for this game. They're not following our rules of engagement. They're in it for the afterlife, and that's a very different goal. And therefore, life is meaningless, and the life of your children or your wife or whoever else, if they are useful as a human shield for the ultimate struggle that will get all of you into heaven, then they're just a meat vehicle for your cause. And that's very different to trying not to kill women and children, which it appears by all evidence available, most of it actually sent through by Gazans, that Israel does absolutely everything it can to spare humans, particularly civilians, in a war like this. And Hamas has exactly the opposite point of view. Their whole purpose is to kill as many civilians as possible.
right. I think another another issue that is at hand, and I do think that my Israeli friends need to also admit this, is that the
Hmm.
Israeli state and Israeli soldiers and Israeli policemen are also capable of making mistakes.
Of course. And
But
sometimes there might be a complete maniac among them, you know? They
right,
exist. There are
and,
bad
and
people.
yes, and these mistakes are not definitive or defining of the entire Israeli state, but they need to be admitted. And these mistakes, like, so an example, the day that I left Israel, so 3 days ago, there was a terror attack. And some terrorists went out and they started shooting everybody. I think they killed 3 people. And then an Arab who was armed went and he neutralized these terrorists. He killed one of them, I think.
Mhm.
But he was holding the gun after he killed these people. Now the police officers came after the fight happened, and they saw this guy who was the terrorist. They saw dead bodies. They come in and they see this guy who's an Arab, and he had a gun. He put the gun down and then he raised his hands.
Mm.
What happened was the Israeli police officer killed this Arab who had his hands raised. Right now, that was a huge mistake, because even
Mm.
if you have a terrorist and who just killed people and they raised their hands, and he was actually screaming, I'm Israeli, I'm Israeli, this guy who killed the Palestinians,
Mm.
you're not supposed to shoot them dead. you
Right.
know if anything, if you're panicking and you feel like there's a major threat, you shoot them in their feet. You try to, like, deflect the problem rather than just exterminating that person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so now this soldier or police, I think it was a police officer who killed this innocent guy, is going to be put on trial, and they're probably going to, be sentenced or something of that sort.
Mm.
Because in in Israel, in this war, in this fight, there is a rule of law where when mistakes are made, you get prosecuted. There is
Right.
a strong state of law that serves justice. This very concept of justice and democracy does not exist on the Palestinian side. On the
Well,
Palestinian side, there's just this fervent of destruction of the Israeli state, no matter what the price is. No matter, there's no, oh, if you kill someone, that's wrong. No. That very concept is very, first of all, it's very Western, because even
mm,
if you remove this conflict and you go to Yemen or you go to Saudi Arabia, killing apostates, killing people who are different, who are critical, who criticize Allah and Muhammad, is justified. So
yeah.
you have a meeting of two vastly different cultures: a reformed culture that has gone through enlightenment, which is also the Israeli culture, but the Arab Islamic culture is still in the depth of the dark ages.
What is Palestine like? I mean, I don't know if you've been there or not. I don't know if you've got friends who live in Palestine, because, again, people have this idea that the one is this oppressed state that is put upon by Israel, that everything they try to do, Israel squashes. They've made it impossible. It's power, it's the oppressor and oppressed. Um, what is Palestine really like, and what is Gaza like from the people that you know who are on the ground there? You probably know more about it than me, so give me an idea of what happens there.
You know, it is said that Palestine or Gaza. Let's just not talk about the West Bank, but Palestine, Gaza, is an
Right.
open air prison, a
Yes.
concentration camp.
Right.
Now, there are many videos that show you before the war, before the 7th of October, how life in Gaza was. Have you seen any of these videos?
I've seen some of them. I mean, thanks to the internet, you're now able to see stuff that maybe you wouldn't have seen before. But I mean, a lot of these things are being posted. There are people inside of Gaza who let us know what exactly was happening on the 7th of October, because they were proud of what they were doing. Hamas people, I'm talking about. They were the ones posting this stuff. People who claim that it's Israeli propaganda. I have to remind them that these are the actual terrorists who gave us the greatest insight. They were showing us how they killed people. They wanted us to see. And obviously, you're talking about before that, where people were showing us what life was like in Gaza. It doesn't look like a very fun place.
Well, life before the 7th of October, from the evidence that I've seen, is not the horrible open concentration camp that people make it seem out to be.
What did you see?
Well, what I wanted to go into Gaza, but
Mm,
after the war, but I couldn't because of obvious reasons.
yeah.
But the first-hand accounts that I've had is that before, and not just first-hand accounts, before the war, you had European citizens from Sweden, Britain, France, all around Europe, who leave their homes, like literally leave Europe, the first world, the
Mm,
developed, secular, open minded welfare states,
yeah.
and they move to Gaza, the open air concentration camp. Now, does that make any sense to you that someone would leave Sweden and Stockholm with welfare, with security, safety, and move to a concentration camp and an open air prison? That does not make any sense to me when
There's
I
a
see
lot
it.
about this thing that doesn't make sense to me.
That's one. The second thing is that life in Gaza was not perfect. It was not perfect due to mostly reasons. They don't have an airport. That you could say that Gaza was not a perfect state. It did, they don't have the same rights in terms of flying, in terms of borders, but it's just the same case in Yemen. You know, in
Mm,
Yemen, during the past 10 years before the ceasefire with Saudi Arabia, the airports were closed. You know, from from
Right.
from that kind of aspect, Gaza is does not have the same living conditions as more stable countries and cities in the world. But what's brewing under that, many people will say that that's oppression, or an oppression that is being practiced by Israel, even though I
Hmm.
don't see how that's Israel's oppression when tens of thousands of Gazans were allowed into Israel to work and make 4 times more money that they were making in Gaza.
Right.
And many of those people were the artifacts and the masterminds behind the 7th of October, because they're the ones who leaked the information. They're the ones who drew the maps of these villages. They're the ones who gave all the intel to
Mm.
Hamas to kill the people who invited them into their homes and into their companies. So Gaza before the war was not the nightmare that it was. What was not the nightmare that the Palestinians will try to make you think that it was.
Mm.
Hamas was, I do think that Hamas's authority over Gaza reminds me a lot of the Houthis' authority in Yemen, where they have these insane religious conservative values, where they have their, because Hamas's biggest enemy is the Jews in the United States of America. In Yemen, you also have the same thing, where the Houthis, who also took over the northern part of Yemen, and they're not recognized by the international community, their
Mm.
biggest opponents and enemies are also the United States and Israel, to the point that their logo, the Houthis' logo in Yemen, is death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews, may Islam win. That's their
Mm.
actual logo. And so I, if I would circle back to what we were talking about a bit earlier, I do think that in the Islamic culture and the Islamic world and the Arab world has failed, especially when you compare it to the Western world. And when you fail, you have to have something or someone to blame your failures and misfortunes on.
Right.
And what's happening in Gaza and in the West Bank and in the Arab world is that we successfully, instead of successfully advancing in sciences, we're successfully advancing in the blame game, where we blame the West and Israel for our misfortunes. Where, when in reality, before the creation of Israel, before the wars between the United States and Afghanistan and their proxy wars, we were just as, regressive as we were right now, as we are right now. So there is no connection there. The West and Israel has more certainly, um, uh, um, deteriorated the situation in the Middle East. At the
Mm.
same time, they have helped us in many ways. So in Yemen, for example, you have numerous of hospitals that are the British hospital, the German hospital, which a part of the colonialism, but they are our most well-established hospitals. So every single local hospital in Yemen, if
Mm.
it is a Yemeni hospital, you avoid it. You try to go to the expensive German and British hospitals that were built by the Brits. So there are two aspects there. There's a positive and there's a negative that has come from the West, but we focus on the negative and we try to blame our misfortune on that. There's a great book called the Islam
And
in
the
the
and the
Modern.
West does that for you a lot of the time too, because people in the West are so terrified of being called oppressors, colonialists, racists, bigots, Islamophobe, that they will do anything. They will do every kind of mental and spiritual and emotional gymnastics to get out of those things. And we'll talk about Islamophobia in a minute, because I know you've got very strong feelings about that word. But to finish your thought here, in Yemen, you still have family who are there now,
I said, yeah, I do.
and how is life in Yemen as compared to, before we even get into Palestine? I mean, this is where your own family and friends are. What is life like there, and who are these Houthis that everybody's talking about?
Well, how is Yemen like before? Well, one of the first videos that I made that went viral was specifically touching upon the idea that you see hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Arabs and Muslim going about and protesting on streets, when they never did that for Yemen.
Yes.
When Saudi Arabia and Iran were having their proxy war, and 8 countries was backing Saudi Arabia, resulting in the death of almost 400,000 Yemenis, where more than 10 million children in Yemen don't have anything to eat. 10 million children.
You didn't
More
have
than,
the magic ingredient. Your magic ingredient is Jews. If you'd had Jews involved, maybe they would have cared more, right?
and that's exactly what I said, is that if it was the Jews who were, behind this war, then the entire Arab and Muslim world would have awakened a bigger revolution than the one that we see right now. But because they were not Jews, no one gives a goddamn.
Right.
And so I said that, and the situation in Yemen is dire. It's always been dire. It's the prices of the food are escalating. Salaries are not being paid. More than 75% of the population is not starving, but they live under poverty. The infrastructure of the country and of the especially the northern part of Yemen is completely dismantled and destroyed. There is no sense of security. There is no rule of law. The Houthis, which is a Shia sect, has taken over, and they have started applying all their insane Stone Age practices. So if you're related to Prophet Muhammad, you get taxes from people who are not related to Prophet Muhammad, which should excite me, because my family has, is related to Prophet Muhammad. But it doesn't excite me, because it's Stone Age traditions that have destroyed the Middle East for centuries. So Yemen, no one cares about this, of course. You will not see protests, you will not see seminars about Yemen by the same people now who are going about hating Jewish people. And I think that's also has been driving my not apathy, but like kind of like, why aren't you voicing your concern about Gaza and the oppression? Why sorry, I was going to say fuck. Well, I
You
just,
can. You
but
can hear.
so like, why the fuck were you silent when my people, millions of my own people, were getting killed? Millions
Right.
of my people were starving. You did not say a single word. I
So
did
so
not see
so
you
that
waving the Yemeni
must
flag.
piss you off on a personal level, because I've used that argument sometimes with people who are hugely passionate about Gaza and Palestine, and then they say, "Well, it's because my co-religionists, the other Muslims, are being killed by these Jews." And then I say to them, "Well, you didn't do anything with Yemen. You didn't do anything in Iraq. You didn't do anything in Syria. And not a person took to the streets and protest. Why are they performing in this case? Is it just pure anti-Semitism? Is that it?"
Yes,
Right.
yes. I did say something about why. Well, I think in one of the videos or something, it was about how, why didn't anybody go out and condemn? No, I think it was a post that I posted a few days ago, where
Mm.
I said the Muslim community never went out to condemn ISIS. And when
Mhm.
ISIS was representing Islam, they were saying this is the true Islam, and we
Right.
slaughter people. And 2 billion people were just at home watching Muslims saying, yeah, well, we're not going to engage about this. We're not going to say no. We don't care. We, the Islamic spirit of revolt and protest and condemning just was not
Mm.
there. And which says a lot about the pacifism and the mainstream doctrine of Islam. But anyway, so someone commented, and they referred to an article of a protest, a Shia protest that happened, condemning ISIS and saying that ISIS does not represent Islam. Now, the interesting part about this is that this person was telling me, you're wrong. Muslims did go out and protest against ISIS. Now, the interesting thing is that when
Mm.
you look at the article and you see what happened, it was merely 1,000 or 2,000 people. Much less. I'm sorry, that was much. I was being generous there. And out of 2 billion, it was in 2017, so 2 years after the ISIS bargage, and more than that, it was a Shia protest in Ashura, which is the Shias, Christmas, you could say.
Yeah.
They were going out doing just what they do in Ashura, and they happen to have signs saying that fuck, ISIS can go to hell. They're not the real Islam. Now, these same people usually go out and protest against the Sunnis and against Saudi Arabia on any given day. It was not the Muslims going out and protesting against ISIS representing Islam. So I think that is one of the most daunting facts and realities about the Islamic world is this: they let Islam get represented by ISIS without saying a single word. And I do think that a part of my activism is trying to say that I want to see the Muslims go out on the streets and have the same kind of like outrage condemning ISIS, condemning the Saudi Arabian state. We see this in the Iranians, the secular Iranians in Sweden and in Europe and in the West. They're the most anti-Islamism groups in the world, and they condemned these atrocities. When in Sweden there was this a seminar held in Stockholm by the Iranians in a mosque, a radical mosque. And I went inside, and when I went inside, like I'm not like, I wouldn't say I'm famous in Sweden, but like people who are activists and engaged in politics do know of me. So when I went into this mosque, people know me. So they were like, "Oh, you're Luai, the critic of Islam."
Mm.
So they was like, "Come here, we're gonna sit you somewhere." They sat me somewhere, and they had someone from their people sit next to me to make sure that I was not recording, that I was
Oh,
not taking
wow.
pictures, that I was not doing anything. And they knew they couldn't harm me because if they did harm me, then hell will then like the Swedish society would stand on, oh, Ahmed got killed just for entering a mosque, so they know that they can't do anything to me. But
Wow.
so like in front of this mosque, like when I was entering the mosque, there were hundreds of Iranians protesting against the mosque. They had this is before the Iranian revolution of, against the hijab. This is in
Yes.
2018 or 2019, I think. So there
Mhm.
hundreds of Iranians were in front of this mosque protesting against it, telling them to go back home, telling them that their state is a terrorist state. So
Wow.
so there are these Iranians and the people who have actually lived through Islamism, lived through the
Right.
oppression, who do not want it in the West. Those are the people who you will see condemning. The Sunnis and the vast majorities of the Muslims will stay silent, and they will only go out to protest when they want to voice their anti-Semitism.
So, why do you think it is that conservative Muslims, or rather, let's say, radical Islamists, rather than just conservative Muslims, because there are different categories here, and again, Islam is not monolithic.
Yeah.
Why is it that more open-minded, liberal, and moderate is the word that people in the West like to use, Muslims, don't receive nearly the amount of attention that the radicals receive? And you could say this about many societies, but there seems to be, especially in Western media, a complete denial that these people even exist. I mean, it's hard for people like you. If it wasn't for X, for Twitter, I don't think that the TV channels and the radio stations and the newspapers are lining up to get moderate Muslim opinions, and that seems odd to me because they always say when something terrible happens in the world, "Oh, but the moderates, not all Muslims are mad terrorists who want to spread their religion by the sword, and Islam is not dangerous; it's the religion of peace. So listen to the moderates." But we struggle to hear the voices of the moderates. Why is that?
Well, because like you said, if you're going to call them moderates,
Yeah,
um, I'm not a moderate Muslim. You could call me well, the vast majority of Muslims do call me on X and everywhere that I'm an ex-Muslim and I'm an apostate. Well,
right.
I think it's the terminology in Islam is so different from like Judaism, because in Judaism, if you're not a religious Jew, you're still a Jew because you're an ethnic Jew.
Right.
So in Islam, you have completely different terminologies. If you criticize Islam, if you criticize Allah, if you say Allah is a piece of shit, but I still love him because he created everything. If you say that about, in Christianity or in Judaism, people will look weirdly at you, but you would still be, a Jew or a Christian, right?
Mm.
You have the right to look at religion any way you want it. Now, because if you say anything critical of Islam, if you say that Islam is not the real book, is not Islam, it's not the book of God. Islam is just no, the Quran is not the book of God. It's
Mm.
just a book of metaphors and
Stories.
fables,
Yeah.
stories. Exactly. You're immediately an ex-Muslim. You're a kafir. You're a murtad. You are. You should be killed in most parts in the Middle East and the Muslim world.
Mm.
So because of that, I am defined as an ex-Muslim. Even though if you ask me, I would define myself as a secular reformist Muslim. But Muslims will not agree to that. They will not. They will say that I'm an ex-Muslim, that I am a kafir, and I'm fine with that. I'm not going to sit here and debate terminology and debate what word to use to define myself. I come from this culture, and I wanted to reform, and I wanted to change. And I do think this confusion regarding moderate Muslim and radical Muslim and
Mm.
is also behind this fear, because people are afraid of coming out and doing what I'm doing, because they would get harassed, they would get truckloads of death threats, which I'm getting. So a lot of people are scared of that. I'm not scared of it. Like I write, I lived for 20 years in Yemen, uh, being scared. So I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
And I've been vocal. I've been extremely vocal for the past 5 years. I've
Right.
I've said everything that I've been saying in Swedish, but in different ways. And but now that I'm saying it in English, I'm getting like more people who speak English want to talk to me and want to hear what I'm saying. But I've been saying this for 5 years, and I'm not scared. I'm not going to be silent. I I'm actually going to be doing this in Arabic as well, sooner or later. And
Right.
the main reason that I've actually been doing this in Swedish is because I wanted to perfect my Swedish. I did not want to go on, social media and write in English. And because if I focused on English, then my Swedish would not have gotten better. So
Right.
I wanted to become like to speak Swedish perfectly. And that's why I wrote and I spoke in Swedish the whole time. I wanted to assimilate. But now we're like 10 years later, when I feel like my Swedish has gotten, no, I wouldn't say perfect, but it's borderline fluent. I write my own articles in Swedish. So now I can venture into English and take the fights into the English speaking world. So, and I'm happy that a lot of people want to listen to what I'm saying. I mean, it's crazy. I did not expect it to happen this way, but in the past 1 month or 6 weeks, I've gotten 100,000 new followers on X and
Amazing.
60,000 followers on TikTok, which says that there is a major drought for people like myself. I mean, you have people like Ayan Hirsi, but Ayan Hirsi is not as vocal as she should be.
Yeah.
I'm kind
In
of like,
fact, I think she's just, I think Ayan Hirsi Ali just has recently converted to Christianity, among other things. But she's been a very outspoken critic of Somali practices like female genital mutilation and, you know, the more egregious parts of Islamism. She's been very vocal, and I think she's been extremely brave. And also, we need to hear more women like your mother from that part of the world, who have things to say, because I just want to read to everybody who doesn't know you, and this will probably give them the motivation to follow you, even if they disagree completely. You said, "Dear Muslims, the world is scared of us. The world is laughing at us. The world is worried about us. There are legitimate reasons for their worry that we can't keep denying. It is time for us to flush the word Islamophobia down the toilet, start looking in the mirror and ask ourselves, how did we get here? How come the largest and most thriving terrorist organizations in the world are Muslim? How come terrorists successfully use Islam to mobilize thousands of Muslims? What is the problem with our leaders, our imams, and our religion? Why do we keep repeating these Stone Age traditions that have failed us and continue to fail us? The world has left us behind. 1400 years of us stuck debating which is the correct sect. What is the correct interpretation? Who is a real Muslim? How can we convince people to become Muslims? Why on earth would anyone want to become Muslim today? They're all scared of us. They're laughing at us. They're worried about us. Delete Israel and the West from the world, and we would still be as ignorant as we are. We would still be stabbing each other. Stop blaming them and look to yourself instead. The enemy is not out there, the enemy is within. Um, Chief among the observations that people may have about that very, very powerful letter is this idea that you think that the word Islamophobia isn't as relevant as some people will say it is. Just in America, 2 weeks ago, the White House issued statements against Islamophobia. Do you think this is a red herring?
I think just like racism, the word racism, like racism. Okay, there's a difference between racism and Islamophobia, but the point that
Sure.
I was going to make is that like the word racism exists and it's horrid and it's terrible and it should not exist and we should fight it. But the word racism and racist is just, has been beaten to death, and not for valid reasons. You could say like everything that I've been saying during this podcast could be
Mm.
labeled racist by a lot of people, and it's
Oh, they will.
absolutely,
There'll be people who will, trust me.
yeah, and it's absolutely not true. And it's the same thing with Islamophobia. But here's the thing: is I use two different words. There's Islamophobia, which is valid, which is great, which is rational, because fearing religion when a religion is oppressive, when a religion kills you for criticizing it, it's rational. Like people say constantly, phobia is something it's an irrational fear, but it's
Mm.
100% rational, necessary even, to be scared of something that wants to kill you for criticizing it. So no, it's in the word Islamophobia. So it's like
Mm.
the irrational fear of Islam. There's no such thing as an irrational fear of Islam. There's only a rational fear of Islam. Now, the word that I advise people to use instead, which would be more valid, which actually would be more real and make more sense, and I use it, is Muslimphobia, because that brings it to the people. That would be the irrational fear of Muslims. The
Mhm.
irrational, just you see any person who's a Muslim or says they're Muslim, you immediately just feel like, oh my God, this person might kill me. Now that's quite irrational because
Mhm.
there are 2 billion Muslims in the world. But even there, like, the Pew Research statistics show that more than half of Muslims have radical views and ideas. So if you're homosexual, then
Mm.
you should be Muslim phobic, meaning that you should be scared, not scared, but you should avoid Islamic circles because there is a high chance that that would not go great for you.
Yeah.
Um, I have one of my closest friends. This is also one of my awakenings. He in Rosengård is Malmo. Malmo is the southern city of in Sweden, and it's like the most Muslim populated. There
Mm.
was a party. We went to the same university, Malmo University, and then we were going to a party in Rosengård, which is like the most Muslim populated area. So I invited him, like, hey, come to the student party in Rosengård.
Yeah.
And he told me, Luai, there are 1,000 reasons that I would get killed there. First of all, I'm blonde. Second of all, I'm gay. And that was actually one of the saddest things that I've heard in my life, because
Mm.
you're Swedish. This is your country. And you're telling me you're not going to come to a party because you're scared of getting harassed or killed in your own place. Well, he actually, to be honest, he didn't say killed. He said I would get like beaten or it would be the end of me. But I don't think he meant he would get killed. But in that area, there is a hatred towards blonde Swedes. And he said that he would, that it would be the end of him also because he's gay and he's scared
Yeah.
of these areas. And now this guy is Islamophobic because he's scared of Islam, but he's also Muslim phobic because he believes or he knows that the Islamic community is not accepting of him being homosexual. So
Right.
he has every right to be both Islamophobic and Muslim phobic. Now, if you're not gay, if the chances of you being persecuted, if you're not someone who criticizes Islam like I do, if you're a friend of Islam and Muslims,
Mm.
you have the right to be, you don't have the right to be Muslim phobic or Islamophobic. Or I'm not saying you don't have the right to be, but the terminology is important, because Muslimphobia and Islamophobia are two different things. There's the
Right.
religion and there's the people. And this is a distinction that people have to take into accountability, because I don't think that Muslimphobia is a good thing. I think fearing and being afraid or hating or discriminating Muslims is not a good thing. It is bad. It is like racism. It is in the same
Right.
pattern of racism and anti-Semitism, prejudices, being fear.
Mm.
Unless you're gay, unless you're an Islam critic. If you're an Islam critic, then you are, under a lot of scrutiny. You could get killed. You could get bullied. You could get hurt. So, and I stand by that. But I do think, like, when it comes to legislation, using the word Islamophobia is insidious, because it is giving Islam, which, by the way, the literal word Islam means subjugation,
Right.
subjugation to Islam,
To God. Yeah.
to God, to Allah. So the very idea of a Western state using the word Islamophobia legitimately instead of Muslimphobia tells you that it's not just the Muslims who are a part of the society, but Islam, which is also political ideology. So
Right.
Westerners, I'm done with leftist Westerners. It's the same people, like leftist Westerners have no idea of the outside world than the little tiny white
Hmm.
villages that they live in. So when they call me right wing, fascist, Islamophobic, racist, even Nazis, there have been leftist Westerners who hear me talk about Islam and say that I am Nazi. So
Wow.
I I don't care, and I don't want to care, and I don't engage or negotiate with ignorant people. But when it comes to negotiating with Islam and Muslims, I do that because I feel it is my plight. I want my community to get better, to evolve, to move past the threshold of ignorance that has been tainted by the culture and the religion that we can't seem to let go of. So it is my plight and duty to argue and engage with the Muslim community and stuff. I do also, like, when I talk to the West, like, I have a video that I'm working on. Well, I have a lot of videos that I'm working on, but one of them starts by saying, "Dear West, I don't have any slides of hope of changing the minds of leftists, because most of them are just a lost cause, just like Hamas."
Yeah. I kind of feel that when people are so steeped in it, and you said that the Palestinian cause has become a religion, I feel like leftism has replaced Christianity in many secular minds, and leftism, wokeism, this idea of you know uh, whether it's Marxism of a kind, it's kind of taken up the God-shaped hole in some people's lives, and again, you're reduced to having quasi-religious arguments with people who don't want to hear about rational ideas. They don't want to hear about facts. They don't want to have debates. If you don't agree with them, you are kafir, as you say. You know,
Mm.
can't have those discussions. So there's no point in trying to uh, waste your breath or your energy on people who are already of the opinion that you're just evil because of your point of view.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Ayan Hirsi was writing about, where she's like, we cannot use secular tools to fight against such a dominant religion as Islam. What we
Mm.
have to use is Christianity. I take, I mean, I understand where she's coming from, because, like you say, leftism, or I would say feminism, equality, welcome refugees, green energy, climate change, those are all the new religion. They have
Yeah,
come to fill the void that Christianity has left in Sweden and
right.
Western Europe. And I don't know how to feel about that. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to preach something I don't know. What I do think is that I think maybe if nationalism, but not, ethno nationalism. There's a huge difference between cultural nationalism and ethno nationalism. I think cultural natural nationalism
Mm.
could have saved Sweden and Europe from the demise that they find themselves in right now. Because if you, in 2007, or like a long time ago, no, I think 2009,
Yeah.
The leading social democratic party in Sweden said literally this: you immigrants, you have a culture, you have something to hold on to. We Swedes, we don't have anything.
Right.
We only have meatballs. She said something that's literally like that. And then you had the Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt literally said this. Um, uh, w- the Swedish being a Swede, or Swedishism, if you could say Swedishism,
Swedishness.
is
Yeah.
Swedishness is barbarian. All the modernism that we have in Sweden has come from outside. So for the past 20, 30
Wow.
years, there has been a loathing and self-hatred and oikophobia within the Western culture, which has said that we need to bring in other cultures that will enrich us and make us something, because we are nothing. That's
It's
that
it's
has
it's almost, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's almost like uh, white Western civilization, if you could put it in those terms. Um, and it's a very peculiar thing. I've seen it even here in South Africa. There's such a it's almost like a masochism. It's like the more you can kind of denigrate yourself, your history, your culture, the more acceptable you will find yourself in 2023. And
Mm.
it's become it eats people's culture, identity, sense of self-confidence. It's just eaten that away in some places like Sweden, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a book titled precisely that, Marxism, Nationalism, I think, by Göran
Yeah.
Adamson, a Swedish writer. And he
Yes.
describes it very funnily, but sadly, truthfully, is that he says that the multiculturalism
Mm,
is the mirror of ethno-nationalism. So, like, you
right.
have two ideologies on both sides. The one is ethno-nationalism, which is people who will tell you that in Sweden there should only be ethnic Swedes, there should not be any non-ethnic Swede, and that's the extreme side. On the other extreme side is this idea that the ethnic Swedish people are stupid. We should bring other people in here to enrich it and make it a great country.
Mhm.
And like Mona Sahlin said, you have great cultures, we have nothing. Like Reinfeldt said, everything that comes from outside is modern. We are barbarians. So that's the other extreme. Now the difference is the ethno-nationalists. They in Sweden they get a vote of 0.0, I think 0.8% or 0.3, much less.
Yeah. So it's
While the
tiny.
to be able to become a part of the parliament, you need 4%. So they have a long stride into getting there. While on the other side, the multiculturalism, who are just as extreme, but on the other side, they are the
Mm,
leaders of the country. So and he calls it masochism because it is this like self-loathing, this kind of like
um,
uh, uh, destructive scenario that they play out, and it's sad. It's disheartening, especially for someone who came here looking for a culture. I came here wanting to adapt to the culture, and it exists. The Swedish culture exists and it's there, but it's being denied by the leaders and the people who make policies. And it's like seeing the Swedes being destroyed by their own leaders and their cultural commentators.
it's extraordinary. It's absolutely wild. And, comparing it to kind of where you came from in Yemen, it must just boggle your mind that this is how Western civilization behaves, how it folds in on itself. It's just crazy. So, what do you think the future is? What is the area where you're most excited about in terms of hope, in terms of turning this narrative around, not just with respect to Israel and Palestine, but the future of Arab culture, the future of Islam, the future of your people, the Yemenis? I mean, these are things that must be on your mind a lot.
So I I am hopeful. Okay, this is gonna sound very depressing to European audiences, but I am hopeful. I think that the Middle East is going to progress sooner or later. We see this in Saudi Arabia, where when
Mm,
political will exists, when the Saudis realize that their oil money is not going to serve them for long, and they have to open up and become more accepting of tourism, accepting for women, let women drive. The Saudi Arabia is even jailing and imprisoning preachers who are preaching Wahhabism and extreme Islamic ideas. Saudi Arabia, you know. So when there is political will, when there's will for change, I think the Middle East is heading towards modernism very slowly, not like the West, but we're going to have our own different version of enlightenment. It's not going to be as bright as and technological, I think, but it will come thanks to the revolution that has been introduced by the internet as well, where you have these Yemenis and these Somalis who open their phone and watch TikTok and see the world unfold in front of their eyes. So I think there will be a modernization and more acceptance and understanding in the future in the Middle East. As for Europe and the West,
sorry, I just want to say that it's also down to leaders like Mohammed bin Salman, who I think sees in Saudi Arabia that there isn't a future for a country that wants to remain in the Stone Age, and for a religion that at its purest, and I use purest with some reservation, but from the point of view of some people, at its purest is actually not helping those countries and the people of those countries to evolve. We see how beautifully the UAE is blossoming. We see how very Oman as well is all of these countries are moving, I think, in a quite positive direction where they're integrating themselves into the world rather than the other way around, and they're making lives for their own people better.
yes. So I think that is true, and we see countries opening up. Morocco as well, and Tunisia, especially Morocco and Tunisia, have been also some of the leading countries in moving towards secularism. And I'm very hopeful about that. I know that Morocco and Tunisia are going to be the most secular countries. I mean, they're already having like pride parades, but they're being like dismantled and stopped. But they are like moving towards futuristic Western ideals very slowly. But they've also cracked down on like Morocco is one of those countries that criticism of Islam being an apostate is things that should be normal. And I think that is the beginning, the first building blocks into dismantling Islam and Islam's
Well,
power on the communities. So yeah, it's happening very quickly. Like in my lifetime, like as I say it's happening quickly, but like in the coming 200, 300 years, I'm very hopeful. So that is the positive news. The bad news, and the foreign minister of the United Arab States also said this, is that while the Middle East is trying to progress and move towards the future, the Muslims and the conservatives and the radical Muslims who move to Europe are not. It's the exact opposite. They cling on to Wahhabism. They cling on to these primitive thoughts and ideas and roots that distinct them from the West and Europe, and they will continue to do that because they find themselves in this crossroad between the West and the Middle East, and they have to cling on to it. And a part of it, a big part of it, is inferiority complex. Is that you come to a country, you have to work your ass off in Europe. You have to work 3 times more than the Swedes to get to where they to get to be as equal as them, because it is their country, it's their system, it's their language. Like I moved to Sweden when I was 20, and I had to perfect Swedish. I had to spend 4 or 5 years learning the language, perfecting it, just to be able to speak as normally as a Swede. So obviously, I had to work harder in every single aspect of my life. You cannot thrive as an immigrant if you do not put 300%. And after putting 300%, you will also have to expect that you're not going to you know, earn or be get on receive as much as you have put in, because it is a Swedish country, it is a Swedish language. I have
Yeah,
put so much more work in my life into learning in the past 10 years than most Swedes, because I come from another culture, another
of
country.
course.
That's just
Yeah.
the reality. And that is something that strikes for me. I have a brain. Okay, that was a bit rude. Now that I have a brain, I I came here with that mindset. I was not expecting to be like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer in 3 months, like many of the people who come here
Yeah.
believe. And so I have that awareness, and I don't have that inferiority complex, but rather I have respect for reality and how things work. And I'm happy with what I have. Many people who come here get struck by, oh my God, Sweden is not what we thought it was. I didn't become a lawyer in 3 months. And that hits them so hard because they see how things work so perfectly for Swedes, and it
Mm.
hits them so hard. They see how Swedes have such a beautifully homogenous society, and they have nothing. They have just their brothers and sisters and mothers and the ghetto. And that makes them either cling on to their roots, which is, um, wherever they came from. So during graduation time, the graduation period in Sweden, most immigrants wave the flags of their countries. They go,
Yeah.
everybody runs out, and it's like this huge celebration during graduation from high school. And everybody waves, like the Swedes wave the Swedish flag as a thank you. We love our country. Most immigrants who were born here, who went to school through taxpayers' money, who lived their
Yeah.
entire lives here, who should be thankful and grateful to Sweden and raise the Swedish flag. The Iranians do, by the way. Most Iranians raise the
What,
Swedish
what,
flag.
what flag do they wave?
The Albanians wave the Albanian flag, the Somalis wave the Somali flag, the Yemenis wave the Yemeni flag, the Iraqis wave the Iraqi flag, the Palestinians wave because they are
Wow.
identityless. They don't feel like they are Swedish. Well,
Yeah.
actually, if they were to debate an ethno nationalist, and an ethno nationalist tells them go back home, they will say, "I am Swedish." And
Yeah.
when they go back home, like to Somalia or Syria or Iraq, they don't feel Iraqi or Syrian. They feel Swedish because they've not assimilated, but they've integrated so much into the system and into the culture. But yet they still wave the flags of their home countries because they feel like that's their roots, and they don't feel the same kind of Swedishness that a blonde Swedish guy feels, and that gives them an identity crisis. One of the reasons that I have integrated successfully in Sweden is, before coming into Sweden, in the airport, my mom told me, "Look, I want you to become Swedish. I want you to perfect the language. I want you to read Swedish newspapers. I don't want you to read Yemeni newspapers. I don't want you to read Arabic stuff. I want you to become a part of that society.
Wow.
And I want you to do that, because if you don't, then you will end up like one of those immigrants who have identity crisis, where their body is in Sweden and their mind is in the Middle East, and they have a clash, an internal clash that they will never solve." So I followed my mom's advice, and I feel I would never wave the Yemeni flag. I will always wave the Swedish flag, even though like I'm not like a super nationalist who will wave the Swedish flag. But if I were to graduate, or I would be in a ceremony where you raise flags, I would raise the Swedish flag. Um,
Well, I mean, it doesn't
so
take much to be called a nationalist in Sweden. You just have to speak Swedish, and you're probably a nationalist. But your mother always knows what's best, and in this case, I'm sure that her advice is continuing to serve you well. Look, I don't know you. We've met for the first time now, but it strikes me that you're exactly the kind of person who I would want to know in Sweden. And I think,
thank you.
if there are any things to be learned from this, and there's so many, chief among them would be that by expressing yourself and by having different views, you make yourself more interesting. And you're not doing it for that reason. You're doing it because these are truly the things you believe. You have exposed yourself evidently to many different points of view, some that are deeply embedded in your childhood memory, some that are cultural that you'll never be able to rid yourself of, and I don't think you'd want to, but some that you've used to help you along the way. And I'm just absolutely astonished at how you've taken on Swedishness, but you haven't lost a damn thing, if you ask me, when it comes to culture, because you can still be proud of where you come from. You can be proud of people like your mother and your father, and you don't have to lose anything. There is a way to make the world better, and we just mentioned the UAE and Saudi Arabia who are moving in that direction. And I think there will come a time, I hope it's soon, where people won't look at each other and go, oh, that's a Muslim or that's a Christian, and therefore there could be a problem here when we talk about certain subjects, where they can go, that's a fellow human being, and we may have disagreements about the supernatural, or we may have different ideas of where we're headed, but we can find a way because we want to get along and we want to make the world better. And I think it's people like you who are at the vanguard of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Your words are very kind, and I am I do think that like one of the main reasons that I am vocal is because growing up, the main person that I saw who was kind of resembles me in any way was Ayan Hersi,
Yes.
but I didn't see many guys doing it. And I thought, like, why aren't there more people like that? Why aren't there 1,000 Ayan Hersis out there?
Right.
And they're there, but they're just scared of the backlash. They're scared of being scrutinized. They're scared of the death threats. And my mom has received a truckload of death threats for her activism, for not wearing the hijab, for not
Right.
succumbing to the societal norms. And I think I carry her genes in that aspect, is that I really don't care. And I do hope, I have a lot I've lost like my brothers and my best friend because of supporting Israelis. Now, many of my Swedish friends have lost their family members and best friends because of supporting the Swedish Democrats, which is the right-wing political party that wants to stop Islamic mass migration. So this kind of like consensus sickness is not just a Middle Eastern thing. And I hope to inspire people to be able to vocalize their thoughts and to verbalize their minds without fearing losing people. Because if you lose your integrity, if you lose your freedom to express yourself, to say what you actually think, then
That's
you're
much
not
worse.
living you're not living a full-fledged beautiful life. So
Couldn't agree more. What a place to end it. Thank you so much. It's really great to talk to you, Luai, and I hope we'll speak to each other again soon.
thank you so much. Thank you for having me.